I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki.
Hi, Tuesday.
Say what you will about the current state of The Simpsons, there is always one episode that everyone watches. Everyone makes an attempt to watch at least one episode of The Simpsons every year. That, of course, is the Treehouse of Horror episodes, because it's usually the best one of the year, let's be honest.
Yeah, it's a yearly staple at this point.
Yeah, ever since they did the first one in season 2, it's like, yep, we're going to be doing one every year. And their way of doing all of the bat poop, insane stuff that just either wouldn't work in any other episode, or they can get away with doing this much violence because it's a Halloween special.
The Simpsons has never been 100% on continuity, of course. We talked about that before when we talked about The Simpsons. But this is the stuff that is absolutely not even trying.
Even when they joke about next time on The Simpsons and they're trying to continue the story, as young me was kind of upset that they didn't. Like, well, they ended it with this and they said they were going to continue it next week, and they didn't.
There are some things from the Treehouse of Horror that, as a kid, I kind of wanted them to follow up on. Like, there was the one where they revealed that Bart had an evil twin, and then at the end, it was revealed Bart was the evil twin all along, and that explained why Bart was the way he was. And I was like, y'all should just keep that for the show, actually. That's just kind of perfect writing right there.
And of course, it gave us the aliens, Kang and Kodos, which have just become staples of the Treehouse of Horror series. It's like you can't do a Treehouse of Horror episode without the aliens.
Yeah.
So rather than do full episodes of Treehouse of Horror, we decided that we are going to do our personal favorite segments of the Treehouse of Horror episodes, simply because we feel we have more to say about these particular segments than the episode as a whole. If we do not end up talking about your particular favorite Treehouse of Horror segments, we apologize. And in the hit us up on the socials, and we'll get a conversation going about those particular segments.
Honestly, a lot of our personal favorites got cut from this too. This was a real debate between us.
We've been talking, I think, for the last month. We light a little bit of behind the scenes before we record every week. We have like an hour-long business meeting over what we're going to do next week, what we're going to do next month. And when it came to Halloween, we wanted to do Treehouse of Horror. Okay, what segments are we going to do? We kind of had a list of 20 different Treehouse of Horror segments, and we had to cut it down.
Yeah, this was a brutal culling of the list, because there's so many that we loved, and we finally had to just put in some rules to get the list down to where it is. So a lot of our personal favorites and ones we campaigned really hard for kind of got thrown out.
Maybe we'll return to those in the future Halloween. We'll see.
Yeah, this was fun looking back on some of these segments. I hadn't just sat down and watched in a while.
Some of the stuff in these older ones I miss. Like, I miss the warnings at the beginning of the episodes. Like Marge coming out saying, this is going to be a very scary episode, and if you watch it, we don't want to get your angry letters in the mail tomorrow.
Yeah, we got messages from religious groups, and they don't want us doing scary things with blood and violence. It was such a fascinating look back on the opening segments, because I had kind of forgotten they used to do that. The little interstitials and the through lines.
The wraparounds. I miss those. I get why they don't have them anymore. Mostly because it's got to be a tiring experience having to figure out a through line story that connects these three segments that they do every year. And also, let's be real, in the United States, commercial breaks now last longer than when The Simpsons first was on the air. So would you rather cut the actual story segment down or eliminate the wraparound completely? They eliminate the wraparound. I get it, but I kind of miss it. Going back and seeing Bart and Lisa telling stories in the treehouse, or telling scary stories while this Halloween party is going on, or Bart doing a parody of the Night Gallery.
Yeah, a lot of the wraparounds were just parodying old horror shows. They did Twilight Zone, they did Outer Limits, they did Night Gallery, they did Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It was really interesting to go back and watch the little warning segments, and that the warning segments would progress, with Marge coming out and being like, we want you to know that this episode is scary. And then the next year she came out and would be like, okay, last year I warned you and you didn't listen to me. So this year you got to listen to me. And then the year after that would be like Homer coming out, or, Bart and her being like, you have to do the warning. They're not listening to us about the warning.
I dare you to turn off your TV. I dare you.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting to go back, because I had honestly forgotten that they used to do that. In syndication, they had cut out some of those wraparounds to make room for extra commercials.
And yeah, that was at a point where Simpsons was at their most controversial. Because here is this cartoon that airs in prime time that was talking about in a very adult way for television at the time. Sometimes about adult subjects like relationships and sex and questioning religion. And children were watching this. And it's like, why are you letting your children watch The Simpsons? As I say this as a child of parents who let them watch The Simpsons.
Yeah, I mean, go back and listen to our episode on The Simpsons, because we did talk about this. But it was fascinating, though, how angry people got. I mean, we say that now with the sort of things people are getting angry about now, but it's not really that much has changed. It's just the target.
I mean, now it's black mermaids and
black elves and
and most recently gay cartoon characters.
Yeah. But it was really cool to have the Simpsons do various pieces like this every year, because it introduced kids to a lot of classic horror bits that they wouldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, what young person in 1990 would have watched The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits? Me. Yeah, I would say that to you. You would do that, but I'm talking about someone who may not have had, even in the 1990s, not everybody had cable, and those shows were kind of restricted to, even then, I think that was like the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was when Sci-Fi had started doing their New Year's Day Twilight Zone marathon, but yeah, I mean, it was definitely you had to be up at 2 a.m. kind of kid, which I was, even at that age. So, it wasn't I will admit to being the oddball child, but I do think that this was the gateway for a lot of children to learn about these things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I saw the Treehouse of Horror and they did like, you know, the Hitchcock reference or the Twilight Zone reference, you know, any of the Rod Serling stuff, you know, Twilight Zone or Night Gallery, or when they did Outer Limits, or a lot of the classic horror stuff. I got those already because I was already familiar with the media they were parodying. I know that a lot of people my same age would not have been at the time. And that Simpsons would have been their first entry.
Yeah, even today there are jokes and gags that originated from other medias that people associate as Simpsons jokes. Like
not realizing that Simpsons, you know, and we'll talk about that when we get to one particular episode. But
I mean, a big one is Dr. Hibbert. How many people are aware that that's a parody of Bill Cosby?
Yeah. The interesting thing is that when you think about how transformational the Simpsons was to the culture, it is so fascinating to look at how many people go like, well, that came from the Simpsons, not realizing where the Simpsons got a lot of their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is so interesting to me to look at where a lot of people are getting their introduction to certain things.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the Simpsons can take a known thing, you know, like whether it's a Twilight Zone episode or a horror movie or any movie, and parody in these parody that particular thing in these shows. Sometimes it's very good, and sometimes they take the formula of that particular thing, give it a little twist, and make it their own. And sometimes it's just, oh, we're just telling the story in 5 minutes. Like, you know, did we really need a Treehouse of Horror segment that was a parody of Avatar? I realized it was the #1 movie of all time at the time, kind of still is, but did we really need that in a Treehouse of Horror episode?
Yeah, it's some of their more recent ones have been a bit strange to me, as in I'm wondering why they chose this particular one.
We're just parodying the most popular film of the past year kind of scenarios.
Or even not, you know, not even the past year, you know, necessarily, but they did have some that were, you know, they had one that was like a James Bond parody with Moe.
Or who remembers
as like Goldfinger, you know?
Or the one that really boggles my mind. Do you remember a movie called Ballistic X vs. Sever?
Yes.
And they parody it for Treehouse of Horror with Homer and Marge. Where did that come from, and what does that have to do with the Treehouse of Horror? So there was this weird time where it was just, let's parody a popular movie, or a movie that had some sort of recognition through the year, and whether it made sense for Treehouse of Horror or not.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the one that you're talking about, and I think that was more the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie movie. What was that one called? Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I think.
Yeah.
They were trying to do. But yeah, that X vs. Sever movie was kind of a similar idea. But
also a little bit of True Lies in that parody.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an old, you know,
old hat kind of thing.
Old idea, but some of them were just, what? Where did this come from? And I think it was just Treehouse of Horror is the one place they used to be able to do these little interstitial bits. Now they have a second outlet for it. Yeah, which are these
Disney
weird little Disney Plus shorts that really do not have a point.
To give Tom Hiddleston another cameo?
I mean, that if there is a point, that is the point, and that's a good point. I mean, I'm all for that point. Keep that point up, thank you. But those are the only good ones. The two that he are in are the only good ones. The other ones are kind of like, why does this even exist? But
and apparently we're getting 2 Treehouse of Horror episodes this year. Not sure how that's going to work, but
they're trying to make up for not having done one in season 1.
Apparently.
I think it was just that they had ideas that they couldn't fit in anywhere else. You know, for some of these weird ones, you know, it's like, well, we can't really do this as a normal Simpsons episode, and it's not good enough an idea to be 22 minutes anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do it for 3 or 4 minutes. I kind of wonder if we might start getting more of the Disney Plus shorts that are just, we've had a weird idea. That it's not necessarily a Halloween thing. It's not, but it's, we had an odd idea based on a current trend or, you know, something. It won't fit into our normal continuity. It won't, but we might do it, and we could get a celebrity cameo, and we might, you know. This has always been, the Treehouse of Horror has always been a fun little break in Simpsons, because it's been the one thing that doesn't really have to explain itself other than it's Halloween and we wanted to.
Yeah.
So we picked a bunch of our favorites, and we're gonna go through them now.
As the cast, it's the cast of The Simpsons. You know who they are.
Yeah. There's really only one of these that has a guest star of note, and it's right up here at the top. For our first pick, we've got right up here in the first installment with The Simpsons doing their version of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
Yep, from Treehouse I. Beauty about James Earl Jones is that he's in all 3 of these segments. Bad Dream House, he's the moving guy. Hungry Are the Damned, he's one of the aliens. But he really gets to show his true talents. That beautiful, beautiful voice of that beautiful, beautiful man reading The Raven. So much so that he did a separate recording of this, separate from The Simpsons, that people listen to every year. Like this, it's their Halloween tradition, separate from The Simpsons, just to hear James Earl Jones reading The Raven.
And it's a good recording if you've never heard it.
Our setup of this particular segment, it's called, the entire thing is called Treehouse of Horror because it started with Lisa and Bart telling scary stories in the treehouse. Yeah. So this particular,
yeah, they did not really expect this, I don't think, to be a yearly event. I really just thought that, I really think that they were just like, oh, let's do a Halloween episode this one year. We've got an idea for 3 little short films. They wrote this one, and it proved like their biggest episode of the year. So they were like, oh, guess we're going to have to do that next year.
And this really is the only one of any of the segments, of any of the ones with interstitials, that actually puts the interstitials as part of the episode, of the segment. Because we're constantly cutting back and forth to Bart and Lisa in the treehouse and the fictional world of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
Yeah, and Homer sitting outside listening to Lisa read the poem to Bart.
I mean, even outside of the full episode, just this entire segment of Bart doing the old fake chokes and then Lisa just reading a book. I mean, by itself, you can just show that one segment to somebody and they'll get it.
And I do like that she is reading it from her school textbook. Because when she starts reading the poem to Bart, because the first two bits from this episode are based off of movies, Poltergeist and Amityville Horror is the first one. It's kind of just a generic haunted house story, and then the second one is the To Serve Man episode from Twilight Zone. But this one is just, they just do the Raven.
Yeah, no twists, no turns. This is just straight reading of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven.
I mean, there are jokes in it, but it is the narrative of The Raven. They don't really change the narrative at all.
They don't change the language either. It's just the poem. And I think their way of the twist is cutting back to Bart and Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, there are little bits where Bart and Homer within the narrative will interject their own language. But
The Raven, eat my shorts, Bart.
Yeah, or Homer trying to, strangle the Raven in the form of Bart, as Homer is kind of want to do in the show. But this is a shockingly accurate version of the Raven for The Simpsons.
And the fact that they used the poem as straight dialogue, like Dan Castellaneta as Homer is really giving this great Shakespearean level performance reading the poem. You're putting a lot of emotion into it. Like, I've never heard the poem performed quite like this, as if it were a play, as if it were an actual television special.
And the interesting thing is, if you know anything about the life of Edgar Allan Poe, you know that this is sort of how he went around and did his own poetry and his short stories too. But he would go and perform for people. So if you were alive at the same time as Poe, and of course, in an area, if you were in like the Baltimore area and stuff, you could have seen him perform this for you in kind of this way, as a sort of one-man play. So interestingly, when you're talking about the Raven, the Simpsons way of doing it is almost kind of the traditional way of hearing the Raven.
Yeah. So for those of you who may not know what the Raven is, the story of the poem is, here is this guy, he is mourning the loss of his lover Lenore, and he decides that he's going to escape his mourning, escape his grief, by reading a book of, quote, forgotten lore. Kind of ends up falling asleep, having a bit of a nightmare, but wakes him back up, where he gets him back into his little grieving of his lost Lenore. He hears knocking. He's scared crapless, because wouldn't you be if you were woken up from your nap by knocking at your chamber door?
Ooh, spooky. Knocking.
I mean, you're asleep, you're unconscious, you're in dreamland, and then it's bang, 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 bang. It startles our narrator. I guess we'll just call him Homer because we're talking about the Treehouse of Horror version. The knocking is not coming from the door, the knocking is coming from the window. So he opens the window. Here comes the Raven. And as a joke, Homer says, "Hey, what's your name, little Raven? What do I call you?" "Nevermore." And in the narration, our narrator, Homer, figures, well, he's probably has an upset owner that has somehow taught him this word, nevermore. And he kind of wonders aloud, "Oh, Lenore, I miss you. Oh, Lenore, I love you. I wish we were together. Is there a chance that maybe, just maybe, that we could be reunited in heaven when I go?" Quote the Raven, "Nevermore." Which doesn't make Homer very happy. I mean, how would you feel if someone or something straight up told you, "No, you will not meet your loved ones in the afterlife"? Which, of course, leads us to the chase. Why, you little, And the gag of Bart the Raven dropping every other background post story on Homer's head.
Yeah, there's a lot of little Easter eggs in that that bookshelf. That
Poem ends that the Raven is still sitting there, sitting on this bust of past that sits upon his chamber door, and the lamp casts a shadow on the Raven, and the shadow is booming over Homer, our narrator, downing his spirits, and his spirits will be lifted nevermore. All around the story is kind of bleak. He's kind of gotten lost in his grief for the lost Lenore. And I think that's done pretty well in the Simpsons version. Especially, he fantasizes of angels above him, which they have it as Lisa and Maggie, and his contempt for the Raven, believing that the Raven was not sent by the angels, but sent by demons and whatnot.
I really like the Simpsons version because it has the Simpsons humor to it, but also it is a really good retelling of the poem, and it understands the themes of the poem perfectly well.
Even, Homer laughing off, he's reading the lines and performing the lines, but his all of Homerisms are there in the lines, laughing off certain things, and the way he winds his voice when he talks about Lenore, Marge, and like they really get it, and they're able to have the story told as is and still have that Simpsons charm to it.
It's a fascinating way to show the general flow of the poem while still getting a child interested in it. I mean, we've talked about the fact that Simpsons wasn't specifically for children, of course. They knew by this point that they had a lot of younger viewers. So it was a really interesting kind of, Poe for kids kind of way.
And even if you didn't understand the words, since it's straight up untranslated, unadapted Poe, the emotions from Homer are enough to kind of get you to understand what he's trying to say. The sadness when he talks about Lenore, the anger when he talks about the Raven. And it kind of works as part of the narrator's grieving process. And, if you want to take it one way, it kind of shows what happens when you let grief consume you.
Yeah, and the final despair from Homer at the end. I really love, and of course I was the weird kid that was already reading Poe by this point. I had a small volume of The Raven and Other Poems, that was just kind of some of Poe's most famous works as far as the poetry. None of the short stories or, novellas or any of that. In fact, I still have it to this day. It was one of my most read things as a child. I used to carry it with me everywhere. It was already practically falling apart by the time the Simpsons episode came out, because I would read it so much, practically every night. So I could already quote the Raven by the time this episode came out, and when I saw that they had done it, I was just fascinated. And I thought this was just the greatest thing. It immediately became one of my favorite bits from The Simpsons.
And of course, as we exit the world of the Raven, we see there are kids and they're not scared of the story at all, which Bart mentions. It's kind of like Friday the 13th Part 1. It's kind of tame by today's standards, but it's probably really scary when it came out. Which Bart isn't wrong.
Well, the thing is that most children, for good reason, have not experienced the sort of horror you need to experience to understand why the Raven is scary. The Raven deals with grief and loss of a loved one. Bart and Lisa are too young. It is grief and existential dread of mortality. And, Bart and Lisa are like 8 and 10.
They haven't experienced that yet.
Yeah, and most children, fortunately, do not in the modern world. It is something that typically comes with age. You tend to age into the Raven being a horror story.
Like Homer, who is just scared out of his gourd.
Yeah. We do, however, see that Homer, a man in his 30s, is much more terrified by the Raven, sitting outside listening on the edge of the treehouse.
Yeah, he doesn't, don't turn off the light, Marge. It's like, oh, Homer, it's just a children's story.
Yeah, but we see that it's not. It's the exact opposite of that. It's Poe was writing for an adult audience. Children do not, and hopefully should not, if they are lucky, understand the horror of this particular poem. We teach this a lot in middle school or high school to children. I mean, I know I learned it at about that age as part of schooling, at least in high school at the very latest. I don't know about you. But it was part of my curriculum as part of American literature. And I think that is both right and wrong. It is right that it should be taught. It's classic American literature. But it is one of those things that is more understandable as you age and sadly do experience more loss.
And you're also, I mean, kind of peeling back the curtain, you're someone who experienced great loss at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, Poe, as someone whose writing spoke a lot to loss. I mean, a lot of his work is about grief and working through grief and dealing with death and the reality of death and reflecting on one's own mortality. There was a lot of death around me as a child. And a lot of loss and grief. So Poe spoke to me a lot more as a child than I think he does to a lot of younger people. And I think for a lot of people, if Poe's work is going to resonate with you, a lot of people age into Poe as they come to understand those themes, just by their own life experience, sadly, or as they come to start to contemplate their own aging and their own mortality in some way. I think his work starts to resonate. For me personally, yes, that came at a much younger age than it does for a lot of people. You know, I was kind of I was vibing on his level at a much different age than I think a lot of people do. It's really interesting to watch kind of how that works. You know, I mean, we got our good friend MC Lars, who teaches Poe and specifically the Raven to
several
school
songs.
Children.
He's written
through rap.
Song. Yeah.
Yeah, he does rap, and I have personally facilitated him doing that for assemblies of school children before, and I've watched his presentations on Poe and how he uses music, and specifically rap music, to teach Poe's work to younger children and high schoolers.
And very little of his Poe raps are changed from the original text.
Yeah, he uses the text as faithfully as possible, and the original meter and rhyme scheme, just with modern beats behind it and modern rap techniques.
Who's that? Who's that? Rapping. Who's that rapping at my chamber door? Mr. Raven. All up in my grill like nevermore.
To teach school children about the principles of poetry and rhyme and rhythm, meter, you know, all of these poetry terms, and also about the themes of Poe's work specifically. And he's very compelling, and when I've seen him do it, it's very well received by the students. So he's been incredibly effective at doing that. And I think that things like, you know, and he's a massive Simpsons fan as well. And was very much inspired by the sort of work done by people like Matt Groening. I'm sure that this episode in particular was probably very influential for him. The thing about using these kind of techniques, just speaking as someone who's worked in education, is you have to meet people where they're at. These techniques, you know, a lot of people want to be like, well, don't lower literature to the, you know, form of where the lower masses are, whatever. But that's so wrong. You know? Meet people where they're at and show them what's going on. Provide them a gateway, you know? Don't be a gatekeeper. Be the gateway. And I cannot imagine how many people were like, what's this poem they're talking about? Is this a a faithful version, or, you know, when they saw The Simpsons and then later they got introduced to it in school and they're like, oh, hey, I know that. I saw it on Simpsons. And they were more receptive to it when the teacher brought it up, rather than being like, another boring thing we gotta learn in school.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, I'm sure a lot of teachers had to do with, like, quote the Raven, eat my shorts in class, but it's worth it because at least the students were listening. Bravo, because I'd much rather more of this sort of thing as a gateway to be like, hey, go look up this guy and this really cool poem and think about it. Because honestly, I love this poem. And I love the things it has to say. And it's one of those things that gets deeper every time you think about it. But it's such a good segment, and if you haven't seen it in a while, go watch it, because it really, every time you watch it, especially if you watched it when you were younger and you haven't seen it, you know, now that you're older, go watch it again, because it hits a little different.
So let's go to our second segment that we're going to be talking about from Treehouse of Horror 2, the Bart Zone, aka Bart's Nightmare. Our wraparound segment here is the kids are home from trick-or-treating, and they gorge on candy. Homer as well. And Marge warns them, hey, if you eat too much candy, you're going to have nightmares. Oh, yeah, we're all going to have nightmares. Yeah, 3 nightmares. What are the odds of that? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Of course, we have this is one we had to cut for this episode, was the monkey's paw, Lisa's nightmare.
Which is a good one, and one we really wanted to do, but we decided on the Bart Zone from this one instead.
So yeah. And this is based off Twilight Zone episode, probably one of, if not the most popular episode of the Twilight Zone. It's a Good Life. For those of you who may not know about this episode of the Twilight Zone, we have a young boy who has psychic powers. He can read minds. He can change people into different things. He can banish people to the cornfields. And it's a good thing Anthony did that.
It's a real good thing.
Might be listening.
Yeah.
Bill Mummy's still alive.
Yeah.
So,
please don't hurt us, Bill Mummy.
I really like Barnes and Barnes.
Yeah. And Babylon 5 too. We really like Babylon 5.
Yeah. And
that one episode of Deep Space Nine you were in, a really good episode of Deep Space Nine.
Lost in Space was good.
No, but this is if you don't remember it right off the bat, it's also known as the Send Them into the Cornfield episode of the Twilight Zone. The really interesting thing is that when they did the short-lived revival series of Twilight Zone in 2002, not the one with Jordan Peele that just most recently aired, but they did one in 2002.
Forrest Whitaker was the host, I believe.
Yeah, Forrest Whitaker was the host of that one, and it was a really, really good series. I'm just going to say, that revival series does not get enough credit. They did an episode that was a sequel called It's Still a Good Life.
And a daughter.
Where Anthony had grown up and had a daughter who had the same powers. And now Anthony was the one being kind of terrorized. And Bill Mummy's daughter, Liliana, played Anthony's daughter. It was kind of interesting to watch that original character, Anthony, get his comeuppance because his daughter was more powerful than him. And
she sent the whole town to the cornfield.
Yeah, she sent literally the entire world, spoiler alert for that episode, but she sent literally the entire world except for her and her father into the cornfield. It was just the two of them. She had sent her mother away because her mother had, so he had lost his wife, he had lost it, and eventually he lost the entire world. It was just the two of them, and now he had to be her plaything, it was such a terrifying, end for that. But it was really kind of fascinating, and there have been lots of versions of this.
Twilight Zone the movie.
Yeah, Twilight Zone the movie did it. But even outside of Twilight Zone, there've been other versions outside of the Simpsons. Black Mirror had an episode that was kind of like this. One of the Fallout games has a quest where you end up in a world that's kind of like this, where you don't want to make the creepy child upset with you, it's like
and for the Disney fans, the opening narration for It's a Good Life was the basis for the opening narration for the Tower of Terror ride.
Yeah.
A different kind of episode requires a different kind of opening narration.
So we get the Simpsons take on it, and of course,
complete with Rod Serling narration.
Yeah,
or Rod Serling impersonator.
We get the bit with the narrator talking about, a utopia where everybody thinks good thoughts, and they have to make sure not to anger the devil at the center of it. The devil is a 10-year-old boy. Bet you didn't see that one coming. It's like
openly saying, yeah, we're parroting that episode.
Yeah. But it is interesting that the stuff that Bart does with his powers, because the stuff Anthony did in Twilight Zone was a little more subtle. If you weren't directly in the room with Anthony, you were a little more safe. You could kind of go about your life unless you saw him coming, and then you had to think good thoughts. But it seems like everyone in town all the time in Springfield constantly has to think good thoughts, or else Bart will know all the time.
Poor Jasper.
Yeah, poor Jasper.
He thinks like, man, this is stupid, and then just turn into a dog.
Yeah, but it is kind of weird watching Bart go through school and making Skinner sing Hello My Baby just over and over all day long. And Sherry and Terry have to bring him milkshakes constantly.
Taking the concept of the episode and making it work within the world of The Simpsons. Like, this could be just a regular Simpsons episode because all of the main characters are here. Even a lot of the side characters. I said Principal Skinner, Mrs. Krabappel is here, Mo.
Yeah, what he does to Mo, though, is fascinating because it shows what he really wants to be doing with the phone calls to Mo. Like, the prank phone calls are not a way to be witty. He's not doing that because he thinks that the jokes themselves are funny. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, he's not coming up with prank names because he thinks the prank names are funny. If he could just make Mo say random
stupid
insulting things over the phone, he would. But he knows he'd never get Mo to say that. That would be too obvious.
I got a big stupid butt and I like to kiss my own butt.
Yeah, that's what he wants Mo to say. However, he knows Mo will never say that if he just says that plainly.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to come up with the ridiculous names and stuff like that to trick Mo in the real world. But I like that with the freedom to just force Mo to say anything, that's what he would force Mo to say. Which I kind of find interesting. The sad thing is that this episode unlike the Twilight Zone episode, is a bit more sad, because in the original episode, Anthony just seems to be a petulant child who never learned self-control. It's the absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Anthony doesn't know right from wrong. Bart does.
Yeah, but the thing is that Anthony's stuff comes from no one had ever figured out a way to teach him empathy without him sending them away. You know, nobody had the power to make him stop and think.
Even in the original episode, they were thinking of taking out poor Anthony, despite the fact that he's a child.
Well, because they never came up with a way to teach him empathy without resorting to violence or anger. You know, that there are ways to explain empathy to children without Anthony, sit down and be quiet now, you know, like, but that is and was at the time. I think the idea of the show at the time was, what if you had a child with ultimate power and nobody there to, like, you know, discipline him properly, you know? It's like, you know, like, what if you couldn't make that child sit in the corner, or worse, you know? Like,
yeah,
it's a very much a, you know, retributive discipline idea, which I think is very 1960s.
But because this is 1990s, Marge just takes Bart to therapy.
Which, weirdly, is kind of the solution. Because we discover that Anthony's problem was that he never really learned empathy. Bart's problem is that he just wanted his dad to pay attention to him.
Yeah.
Like, Homer was too busy watching football and stuff, and Bart was just kind of being like, hi, remember you have a kid? Pay attention to me. And the therapist points out rightfully that Bart wants attention so badly that he doesn't care if the attention comes from having good grades or turning Homer into a giant jack-in-the-box.
Which is from the original episode.
Which is from the original episode. The horrible moment where Anthony turns a guy into a jack-in-the-box, and then the other people start screaming, please send it away in the cornfield. Please send it away into the cornfield. But in this one, we actually get a slightly happier resolution, which was Bart starts going on father-son trips with Homer Jack-in-the-Box.
And they get closer.
Yeah. To the point where Bart actually forgives Homer and restores him back to his original body. At which point Bart wakes up screaming from the nightmare.
Because this is Bart's nightmare. What's the worst thing Bart could have? His father telling him he loves him.
Yeah. But it is a more fascinating look into Bart's psyche, which is that probably within the context of The Simpsons, a lot of Bart's behavior probably is just, hey, Mom and Dad, could you pay attention to me a little bit? And you know, I would really like a hug from my dad rather than him choking me and screaming at me all the time.
But from the purposes of the show, at least early Simpsons, Homer's at work and Marge is taking care of the baby.
Or Homer's at the bar.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes from work to Moe's to the couch to watch TV.
Hmm.
In the early Simpsons days, most of what we see as bonding between Homer and Bart is watching TV.
So maybe if she had bonding time in the series proper, their relationship would be better. But as this episode points out, that is the worst thing that could happen to Bart. is having a loving relationship with his father. Says a lot about Bart.
Worst, but it's
definitely
more
not what
that
Bart
I don't think it's probably what Bart wants, but just I don't think Bart knows how to handle it.
I mean, it's a situation where, ask anyone who's been in a toxic relationship with anybody. When they're in a healthy relationship, sometimes they don't know how to handle that.
Yeah, and I think that's what Bart's nightmare is about here. Is like he wants to have the healthy relationship with his dad, but he doesn't know what that would look like. He has no context for that.
All right, so we'll move on to Treehouse 3. This is another one where we had to cut one because we were juggling between Clown Without Pity and Dial Z for Zombies. You killed the zombie Flanders. He was a zombie.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we did have to cut Dial Z for Zombies from this list. So we are going to be talking about Clown Without Pity from Treehouse 3. Another one based off a Twilight Zone episode, Living Doll, with a little bit of Child's Play thrown in, since that was the movie of the time.
My name is Taki Tina, and I don't like you.
Yeah, the original Twilight Zone episode, based off an actual existing doll called Chatty Cathy.
Chatty Cathy, oh Chatty Cathy. Sorry.
So on this one, it's Taki Tina. A stepfather tends to, after coming into a family, kind of resents his new stepdaughter, starts being mean to her, and then her doll, Taki Tina, starts talking to the stepfather, saying that he doesn't like him. And throughout the episode, it's kind of debated whether Taki Tina is actually doing anything, or whether the father is simply having some sort of guilt for mistreating his stepdaughter. Until the very end, where Taki Tina straight up trips the stepfather, falling him down the stairs, breaking its neck, and then Taki Tina starts talking to the mom.
My name is Taki Tina, and you'd better be nice to me.
And of course, Child's Play, because it is a male doll, and unlike the Twilight Zone episode, we straight up see the doll trying to kill Homer.
With a butcher knife, which of course is Chucky's preferred weapon.
The overall wraparound of this episode is it's a Halloween party, and they're telling scary stories at a Halloween party.
I love Marge trying to scare them with like the old
witch thing.
Yeah, this is the witch's hair, this is the witch's eyeballs. Bart's like, we haven't gotten the eyeballs or the hair yet, and then like Homer's just eating all the food items. That's always been one of my favorite jokes. Like, Homer, he's like, what? It was stupid anyway.
So the episode opens. It's Bart's birthday. Homer has, of course, forgotten to give Bart a present, so he runs out to the closest store, which sells cursed items. And of course, this is the short that has the famous, "That's good, that's bad, that's good. Can I go home now?" So yeah,
the froyo is also cursed.
The froyo is also cursed. Yes. So yeah. So if you've ever seen that scene, this is where it's from. And of course, we get the nice little nod to the original Twilight Zone episode. My name's Krusty, and I love you very much. And of course, as the episode goes on, Krusty starts killing Homer. I'm Krusty. I don't like you. I'm Krusty. I'm going to kill you. You, Homer Simpson. Of course, leading to one of the funniest lines in Simpsons history. Marge, the doll's trying to kill me, and the toaster's been laughing at me.
Yeah. I don't know what's the beef between Homer and the toaster, but I've always wanted to know. Of course, this also has one of my other favorite moments, which is, my baloney has a first name, it's Homer. My baloney has a second name, it's Homer.
That's another joke that the modern generation is not going to get.
Yeah. as much as I absolutely loathe commercials on like a deep spiritual level, I do miss a good commercial jingle.
Yeah, the old Oscar Mayer wiener. Oh, the old
Yeah.
Oscar Mayer ham jingle. My bologna has a first name. It's a OSCAR.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell how much I love a commercial jingle by the fact that just within this segment, I have been able to sing two of them. And one of them is so far before my time.
Yeah.
Like, Chatty Cathy dolls were not even still, I mean, those were off the market well before I was even born. um, I was such a weird child that, like, by the time this episode of The Simpsons aired, I was like, wow, this whole thing is, like, Chucky and the Living Doll episode of The Twilight Zone, in which they were parodying the Chatty Cathy doll, which was voiced by June Foray, and also I can sing you the Chatty Cathy jingle. And I'm like, how old was I when this episode aired? This episode aired at like, I was 10. I'm a 10-year-old that can do all of that. I'm like, that's a doll from like the 1960. And I'm a 10-year-old in the 90s.
Is this the first instance of us learning about whether Patty or Selma's sexuality?
I don't know, but it might be. That's one of the few things from Treehouse of Horror that I think is legitimately in the main canon of the show.
Homer runs out of the bathroom naked, and then I forget which one it says, like, there goes the last strain of my heterosexuality.
Yeah. But that may be the first time that it was mentioned, and it may be one of the few things from Treehouse of Horror that I forget the timeline on that. But yeah. This episode is really fun for me because I am one of the biggest Chucky fans
Especially
ever.
as we are talking, the new season of the show is out.
Yeah, and I've already watched the first episode of the new season, which is all that's aired as we're recording this. So good. Yeah, so watching this, I was like, yeah, it's, I'm such a huge Brad Dourif fan. So this is such a cool episode for me. And I think this was, when we were talking about what segments do we want to do, I think this was the first one both of us immediately were like, we have to do Clown Without Pity.
Yeah.
This one was the no-brainer one. Just because it's possibly the most classic Treehouse of Horror that they've ever done. And
the bit of a B plot with Krusty Doll and Malibu Stacy.
Yeah, where Krusty keeps like passing by Malibu Stacy and being like, "Hey, what's up?" Even though we keep having the bit where the Krusty doll keeps changing size. There's not a consistent size between how big the Krusty doll is.
It's that has to be a reference to Child's Play, going from the prop doll to the little person in a costume.
Yeah, although eventually in the Child's Play series, they kind of finally equalized that. They finally got the bit. It was in the early movies. It was a problem where the dolls and the puppets and the actor in the costume, when they needed it to move right, the sizes never quite matched up. But now they've gotten it all equalized, where it's like, okay, we've got actors that are exactly this size when we need it, and we've got animatronics that are exactly this size, and we've got the dolls when people need to hold the doll. It is exactly this, they've equalized it all so that every time you see a Chucky or a Tiffany doll, they always look exactly the same size, and anytime you see it move or it's an animatronic or whatever, it always looks the same size. It's all fine, but back at the time this episode was made, that was a fair kind of criticism of the series. The thing going back and forth with them wondering, is Homer just losing his mind because the toy can't possibly be doing anything, is also good, because that comes up, of course, both in the Living Doll episode and in the Child's Play series.
No, this is 1990, so we're a few years shy from Toy Story.
Yeah. Do you remember that they actually did make, I mean, it was years later, but they actually did make a talking Krusty doll based on this episode?
Did it have the switch from good to evil?
It did have the switch from good to evil, and I used to have it, and then it was I lost it in a breakup.
Oh.
Yeah. But it was really cool. It came in a box that looked very similar to the box from the episode. I mean, it was really great. They did a really good job, and it had a little string on the back you could pull, and it would say all the lines from the episode. And depending on whether or not you had it switched from good to evil, it would say 2 sets of lines. So you could make it say the like, I'm Krusty and I love you, or you could say, I'm Krusty and I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you, Homer Simpson. I'm going to, like, it actually had the lines from the episode, depending on which way the switch was set. It was really, really cool.
Well, what kind of manufacturer has an evil switch on a doll?
Yeah.
Krusty, apparently.
Krusty. Well, I mean, he's Krusty and he endorses this event and or product.
Yeah.
And that was actually on the box as well. Yeah. That, of course, being the kicker of the episode, that the doll was set to evil and you just have to flip the switch and it'll be fine. And then Homer turns the doll into a servant. And we end the episode with Krusty going back to the Malibu Stacy dream house.
And this is another ending that even at our age, we would not get, because it's an ending to an episode of Love American Style. With the heart and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah. It is a very kind of strange throwback.
You can tell the age of the people who were writing this episode.
Yeah. But poor Krusty doll that he just is coming home after a long day of drudgery serving Homer.
Pray for Mojo, pray for Krusty.
Yeah.
But all in all, it's a pretty good parody of the, evil doll style of storytelling. So we'll move on to Treehouse V, and probably one of the most well-known of these parodies, The Shinning. Obviously a parody on The Shining.
It's The Shinning. Do you want to get sued?
Keith, you wanna go run through quickly the plot of The Shining?
Alcoholism is bad. Don't do alcoholism. Was that a good enough run through of the plot of The Shining, or do we need more?
Red rum. Hello, Mrs. Torrance.
No, I mean,
play with us.
The family gets job as caretakers of a hotel over the winter. They're going to be the only ones there, The problem is all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and the father goes bonkerdoodles and starts chopping up his family. And there may or may not be ghosts, but probably it's just alcoholism.
So yeah, in this version of events, we have
Also,
Homer.
the little kid is psychic. The
little kid's psychic. Yeah. So not sending kids to the cornfield.
Yeah. No, he can't do anything with his brain. He's just, telepathic.
Kind of want to see them come back to this in a future one and then parody Dr. Sleep.
I mean, it might be fascinating to see them do a sequel to the one they've done before. I don't think they've actually done any of the sequels to the ones they've done.
But if they were going to do one, this would be the one.
Yeah,
anyway.
no, it'd be a great one. The thing about it is that I like their take on it, which was that instead of alcoholism being the kind of slow spiral that leads to Jack's loss of his grip on reality, The Simpsons kind of has it be the opposite.
Yeah, because Mr. Burns, who owns this hotel, takes the beer away and then cuts the cable.
And cuts the cable feed because it's his way of getting more out of his employee. That if the beer and the TV are not there to distract Homer will theoretically work harder because there will be no free time.
No distractions.
Yeah. That ends up being the reason that Homer snaps is because he has no outlet, no free time. Which is kind of a fascinating commentary because I won't say it's more faithful to reality, of course, because that would downplay the original,
It's more faithful to The Simpsons.
Well, it's more faithful to The Simpsons, but I was going to say, I don't want to downplay the very real thing that Stephen King initially was trying to talk about and deal with in writing the original story. But the commentary in The Simpsons is at least equally as important, which is that if you don't give people leisure time and ability to stress relief, I'm not necessarily saying that alcohol is particularly the greatest at that, but, there is no outlet for Homer. He doesn't have any recreational activity. He has no friends, he can't go bowling, he has no television, he has nothing. So there is no way for him to de-stress from his job. It is within the context of at least this short what leads him to snap. Violently so in this case, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Given when we're recording this, we've kind of all been through a similar thing recently,
Yeah.
When a lot of people had to stay inside and not see friends or family, not go out as much, not, a lot of people lost a lot of their stress relief measures. And everybody knows the stresses that caused in their own life. You know? It's not good for people to be left without stresses.
And some people did resort to violence.
Unfortunately so. But even the ones that didn't, it's not a good place to be in. So it's weird when you get these kind of intersections of The Simpsons accidentally speaking to real issues that I don't think they were necessarily like, let's talk about a serious topic via the, I'm not sure that ever came up in the writer's room. But it is bizarre when it does come up by accident, because I think these are the sorts of things that are just in the background stew of people's brains, where you have things like no beer and no TV make Homer go crazy,
Mhm.
But it's a really interesting moment of the bit where Willie meeting Bart and Bart reading his mind and him being like, you have the Shinning, and when your dad goes crazy and tries to kill you, just send me a message with your brain and I'll come and help,
Except for the other 3 and 4, that's Billy's time.
Yeah.
But it's so, right at the beginning of this short, they say this has happened before. Like, Mr. Burns taking away the beer and cutting the cable, didn't that also have the last caretakers murder their family? Well, if it happens again, I owe you a Coke.
That was kind of the point of the Shining as well, is that, this isn't the first time that's happened at the Overlook either. The previous caretaker had killed his family and then himself in the hotel. That's why they needed Jack and his family. So that's not just a Simpsons thing that they made up.
But
that's directly
the way
from
it was said. I'm talking more of the way it was said.
It's a funny joke of him like being like, well, I'll owe you a Coke if it happens again. But honestly, I mean, capitalism, it's like, isn't that just like Mr. Burns though?
Yeah.
I mean, he does that all the time at the plant in the main show. It's just like, Smithers is always coming in being like, well, sir, haven't we already lost 4 guys to this same thing? And Burns being like, well, if we lose 5 more, it'll be, I'll get a punch card on my next pizza or something. It's like, there's just always a thing,
I mean, I kind of wondered why they didn't do the Sherry and Terry come play with us, Bart. But I assume there was just no time in the short to do that. But they found a way to put the elevator full of blood.
I love the joke about, that's weird, the blood usually gets off on level 2.
Homer does find a bit of stress relief, stress eating.
Well, yeah, after Marge locks him in the freezer.
Like he just
can't murder now, eating. I love the little bit of Homer breaking in and going like, here's Johnny, and then that's
in the wrong room.
And then he's the wrong room, and then he like goes into the next room and does the
David Letterman.
Yeah, David Letterman. And then he goes in and he's like, and I'm morally safer and all that.
And Andy Rooney on 60 Minutes.
Yeah. Like,
of course, it leads to the running gag of the entire special of all of Treehouse V is that Willie tries to save the day and he ends up with an axe in his back. It happens in The Shinning, happens in Time and Punishment, happens in Nightmare Cafeteria. I'm bad at this.
Yeah, and Marge's joke as he lands, going like, "Oh, I hope that rug was Scotch guarded." It's just maybe one of the worst jokes in The Simpsons. Like, such a bad pun. Yeah, and then of course the resolution being that Homer finds Willie's little portable TV and sits out in the snow, and then has one of my favorite Simpsons lines: "Urge to kill, fading, fading, rising, fading." thing.
That's another. Yeah, it's another one of those Simpsons memes that persists to this day. That Urge to Kill Rising, and it's okay. Tony Awards today might be different, but Tony Awards in 1990, I can see why it would turn Homer Urge to Kill Rising.
Well, I mean, I still watched the Tony Awards in the 90s. I mean, again, I was so that kid, wasn't I? Man, I am just sitting here having an epiphany of how I turned into this adult. Boy, if you ever wanted to know how I turned out the way I am. No, but yeah, I was like, okay, yeah, no. Why are you even mad, Homer? It's Tony Awards. You're gonna sit down and watch the Tony Awards. Shut up.
I think it's because of the musical number. It's the host. It's like, Dad, change the channel. Can't. Frozen.
But yeah, no. I'm like, that's a good family time right there, Homer. You shut your mouth. No, but that to me was always a fun time, you know. I always liked the line where Marge finishes his line about, you know, no TV and no beer make Homer something something go crazy. Don't mind if I do. You know, that's always been. There's so many good lines in this one.
Yeah, and it's a great parody of The Shining.
Yeah, it sticks kind of very close to The Shining without some of the more disturbing ones. You know. I didn't want some of those scenes in a Simpsons parody. Thank you very much. But
I mean, it even gets a shout out as Maggie is spelling red rum with her toy blocks.
Yeah, the Maggie and the blocks with the red rum is really fun. Because at one point you do see her. There's a reverse angle before the cable gets cut when Homer is watching TV. And you see Maggie spell out murder on the reverse side. And Homer can't see it. And just before the cable cuts out, you see her spell out red rum for Homer to see. But if you look very quickly, when you see like Homer looking at the TV, you can see on the ground she has spelled out murder. Just for the audience to see. And then when it goes into the reverse shot and you see the TV for it to blink out, she's spelled red rum. But
could have used at least 1 second of one of the kids looking at their finger. It's probably one of those jokes that they just did not have time for.
Yeah, everything has to go so fast, so a lot of it got cut out. But yeah.
So our final story. We're going straight to Treehouse VII, the Genesis Tub, based off another Twilight Zone episode, The Little People. The Twilight Zone episode, 2 astronauts land on a planet where they find a population of 1 inch tall people. One of the astronauts kind of gets a god complex and kind of tries to become their god. First a benevolent god, then a vengeful god. The second astronaut says, hey, our ship's repaired, we gotta go. First astronaut says, no, I am God. I am going to stay here and be God to these people. Second astronaut leaves. Not long after, another team of astronauts who are extremely giant-sized land on the planet. To which our first astronaut says, no, I'm God here, not you. And they kind of squish him like a bug.
Oopsie.
That's the episode. Now let's see how the Simpsons handle it. It's science fair time, and Lisa is making up her science fair project. How cola works on a tooth, saying science has ruined so many things, and it's time for her to ruin soda as well. He says as he drinks his soda, recording a podcast. So Bart also comes in with his science fair project on static electricity. Shocks Lisa, who then shocks the tooth. The combination of static electricity, the tooth, and the soda create life. Lisa is very shocked that she has created life. She first thinks it's mold. She goes look at it. Oh, I've created life. I've created my own universe.
Yeah, I mean that's the first big difference is that whereas in the Twilight Zone episode they just find an alien species that lives on this planet, Lisa actually there is a species that evolves from her DNA.
She goes down for breakfast. She comes back and realizes that these little people have evolved from all the way up to the Renaissance era. Because when she woke up, they were cave people. When she goes to breakfast and comes back, they're already in the Renaissance era.
And
I've created Lutherans.
Yeah, she sees one of them nailing something to the door of a cathedral. She realizes that it's a tiny, their version of Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door. And she realizes, oh, I've created Lutherans. Which has always been possibly my favorite line from that episode.
And the next day passes, and they have evolved past modern day into the future. Already with advanced technologies. And of course, Bart comes in. Hey, looks like you made a little city. Oops, my finger slipped. Oops, my finger slipped. Oops, my finger slipped. Crushing their cities and crushing their people.
Well, the thing is that I don't think at this point Bart realizes there's people in there. He says, I think what he says is you made a model city.
Yeah, he thinks this is a model. He doesn't think that these are actual people.
And Lisa, says, like, stop it, you're hurting them or whatever. It is fascinating that they have the speed at which they're going is so quick that they're able to rebuild and also build spaceships
that attack Bart. Ships that go into quote outer space to attack to attack Bart.
Yeah, so there's the cool little bit where the spaceships go out of Lisa's room and attack Bart. I don't know how they knew to do this, but it's a short, so don't ask too many questions. This angers Bart, and he tells Lisa, the second you're not watching over them, I'm flushing that whole civilization down the toilet because they attacked me. And so Lisa promises that she's going to protect civilization, and she won't let Bart destroy it. But that's when they decide to shrink her into the tub.
Nice little Dr. Frank.
Yeah, the nice little Professor Frank inside the thing that has debigulated her. They have decided to bring God into their universe, have her
protect
live with them.
Yeah. And of course, everyone has questions for God, Lisa. Why does bad things happen to good people and all this stuff? Stuff that she really can't answer because I don't know if they intended to make this a religious argument or not. Because what if you could talk to God and he says, it was an accident. I didn't mean to create you.
Well, I mean, that is one of the that's kind of the point of deism, is that, that is a theological argument in and of itself, is that God exists, but God just kind of set the universe in motion and then walked away. There was a creator, but that the creator does not actually care or oversee the universe. I mean, that it's a legit theological argument. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that Lisa is going, well, I don't know. Creating you was an accident, I mean, she doesn't say it, but that is what happened here, is a philosophical argument that has been proposed by people throughout the centuries, Yeah, perhaps something did create us, but perhaps it, did it either with intention and then got bored and wandered off, or maybe it didn't intend to and wandered off, or, whatever.
He's an absentee landlord, as Al Pacino said in The Devil's Advocate.
Yeah. Having the idea that Lisa just kind of accidentally created life and had no plan for it.
Other than getting a gift certificate out of it.
It's an interesting one. This whole thing was an accident. And oopsie. But now she's trapped in there with them, and she's trying to tell them, if you make me big again, I can protect you, but I can't do anything if I'm trapped in here with you. And of course, Professor Frink is like, well, that would be impossible. I would need to be able to make you big again. That's absolutely impossible. Bart comes and grabs the tub, and Lisa is screaming, no! But it turns out that Bart doesn't flush the tub. He just takes it and gets an A at the science fair and wins the gift certificate.
And of course, you see Lisa just completely drop any pretense she's ever had. And it's like the smart Lisa was like a charade. And you kind of see the real Lisa. It's like, Principal Skinner, I created the universe. Give me the gift certificate.
Well, the thing is, you can be smart and want people to validate you.
And she just her mood completely changes. Is like she looks at them from being nice, I'll help you. Like, aren't you supposed to be groveling to me? Like, her demeanor completely changes.
Well, that is kind of the ending of the Twilight Zone episode, too, except she doesn't get crushed here. Yeah. She has a slightly happier ending in that she will theoretically continue to live out her life with the people she created. That's kind of the way that guy acted in the end, too. It's like, I'm the god here, Pay attention to me. So, that is more in line with the episode that it was based off of, even though it took almost nothing from it except the general premise of being a god to a tinier race of beings. The more interesting thing about this episode, though, is all of the things that it spawned. The main one that everyone will think of is the South Park episode Simpsons Already Did It. Where Butters is trying to think of ways to take over the world and just keeps getting told that Simpsons already did that in an episode. But the plot or whatever is that Cartman gets sea people and they end up being just brine shrimp. He thinks he's going to get little mermaids or whatever, but they're, brine shrimp. He accidentally ends up creating a race of people like that Lisa does in Genesis Tub. Cartman ends up, making them worship him as a god and all that kind of stuff. And it spirals out of control. At which point, Butters notes that this is exactly like the Treehouse of Horror episode, Genesis Tub. And then Chef points out that, well, no, Simpsons just took that from a Twilight Zone episode. They didn't even originate that idea. And the whole thing points out that Simpsons has been around forever. Of course, you're not going to find anything that Simpsons hasn't already done. And of course, that episode aired in 2002, and they were already talking about how long Simpsons had been on the air by that point.
20 years later.
Yeah, and 20 years later, we're still talking about Simpsons and South Park still being going concerns. There's, of course, the Futurama episode as well, where Bender accidentally ends up becoming a god to a tiny race of humanoid
that are growing on him. I remember that episode.
People, because he's floating in space and a little asteroid crashes into him and it contains life, and that the life grows on him, and and it ends up basically the same way as the South Park episode, except that it aired just a few months before the South Park episode. The society evolves. It ends up splitting into two societies. They end up going to war with each other. They develop nuclear weapons. They end up nuking each other out of existence. Bender is left floating alone in space. He ends up meeting God, who helps him get back to Earth and back to his friends. It's fascinating that the two episodes that, spun off of it, one of which was made by basically the same people that made the Simpsons episode.
Yeah.
You said that you didn't know if the Simpsons meant to make a statement on religion, but the Futurama episode definitely did. The interesting thing is that all of these episodes end up going back to a story called the Microcosmic God, which is from the 1940s. And it's kind of where the Twilight Zone episode and the Matt Groening stuff and the South Park stuff, it all kind of got their ideas from. It's fascinating, all these little things that can spin off of these ideas when you're tracing these things, because there's the idea that humans only have a finite amount of stories. I mean, we've talked about that before on the show. Mm-hmm. And that they just kind of spin off in infinite combinations. I don't know if you want to call the Rick and Morty episode kind of a spin-off of this as well, but there's the Rick and Morty episode where he's got the universe inside the universe that powers his car. It's got Stephen Colbert in it. It's like he goes in and he's like, I created a universe to power my car, and then he discovers that like the Stephen Colbert character has built a universe to power his universe. And so they go into that universe, and each one of them considers, like, Stephen Colbert's universe considers Rick to be a god, and then they go into Stephen Colbert's created universe, and they consider Stephen Colbert to be a god, and then, and each one of them starts slowly realizing, wait, this guy he's just the dude that created us to be a battery to power his, oh my god, my life is meaningless,
I mean, you can also kind of go to the first Men in Black, but that's more of a end credit gag.
Yeah, but I mean, it is,
or even Marvel,
similar kind of, yeah.
Marvel. I mean, we're getting an entire movie, Quantum Mania, about this.
It is fascinating, the idea of that. There's a similar story that George R.R. Martin wrote that was turned into an episode of Outer Limits in the 90s, the reboot Outer Limits that was in the 90s, called The Sand Kings, where a guy becomes kind of a god to a little alien creatures that dig in sand, and they start creating sand castles in the shape of him and stuff. It was one of the bridges, I think, Bow Bridges or something maybe, and all that, and it kind of ends up going awry and stuff because of their worship of him and whatever. So yeah, this idea of a human becoming a god to a smaller in size kind of civilization is kind of a fascinating thing. And what would we do if we met, I mean, we've already kind of dealt with it in Marvel with the Eternals.
Yeah.
and stuff. You know, what if the Earth was an egg? But it is a really interesting thing of all the stuff, especially in animation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're just taking it in the realm of animation, that this one little episode of Simpsons is kind of spawned. Personally, while the Genesis tub is fascinating, I think the Futurama episode does it better because it gets to be a full-length episode and they get to explore the philosophical themes that they couldn't do in The Simpsons. So if you want to see what Matt Groening's team can do with this same idea, but while actually exploring the philosophical and religious themes, go watch the episode of Futurama. It's called Godfellas, and it is absolutely incredible. And I love that. It's one of my favorite episodes of Futurama.
All right, so let's ask the question, Kiki. Does The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror have the magic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I still love the Treehouse of Horror idea and the stuff that they're doing.
I would say yes as well. Even the more modern Treehouse of Horrors, it's going to have at least one segment that you're really going to like. And especially these old classic ones, they still hold up. Disney Plus has all of the Treehouse of Horror episodes that have aired so far, and you can see them in order in their little Halloween collection if you go to that. Yeah. So let's move on to next week. Ooh, we're actually getting into some real horror next week. Jennifer's Body. Yes, Disney owns this movie because this is a 20th Century Fox film.
If you've been on for the kind of easygoing, like, oh, I'm getting my spoops on because it's spooky season and we're doing the comedy and we're doing the Simpsons and this might be the time to get off the ride for the rest of the of the month. We'll see you after, because we're getting into the real scares now.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen this movie completely, so it's going to be kind of a first time view for me. But you know, it's Megan Fox. Your mileage may vary on Megan Fox, but I've always heard good things about this movie, so can't wait to finally check it out.
Yeah, cult classic that's kind of getting its moment again. So we're gonna go back and talk it over next week. So
yeah, come back next week for Jennifer's Body, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye. If you want to help the fight for human rights in the U.S., the American Civil Liberties Union works to protect constitutional rights for all Americans. Their website is aclu.org. If you need reproductive services in the U.S. or wish to donate to those who do, go to abortionfunds.org for more info. The battle isn't over until the last person surrenders. The fight continues. Don't let the magic stop here.
Join our conversation online on Facebook at Rewatching the Magic,
Twitter at Rewatch the Magic,
and of course, new episodes every week at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com.
Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.